Hey guys, tonight we slip into a quieter age, when you rise before dawn in a port town that smells faintly of fish, salt, and yesterday's beer tossed into the gutters. A day like any other, except this one decides to pull you towards Santiago de Compostela. Though if we're being honest, you probably won't survive this journey if you take it the way people did in the Middle Ages. Disease, storms, blisters that never quite heal. Fun times ahead. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop your location and local time down in the comments. I always love seeing who else is wandering the map with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The cobbled streets are slick from a drizzle that fell in the night. Your sandals, patched twice already, scuff against the uneven stones. Somewhere a baker stokes his oven, the yeasty air sneaking into the alleys. You clutch a small satchel. Bread, a few coins, maybe a lucky trinket shaped like a scallop shell. The emblem of Santiago. Mainstream fact for you. That shell became so closely linked with pilgrims that it served as both badge and bowl, handy for scooping soup or water. Imagine branding your trip today with a reusable coffee cup instead. You breathe in, tasting brine. Ships creak against the tide. The little harbor is full of vessels no larger than your neighbor's fishing boat, and you wonder, are these really meant to cross oceans? Some say yes, some say madness. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims traveled mostly by land or dared these patchy sea routes. Either way, you feel a tug in your chest. Faith, curiosity, or just the idea that maybe Compostela has better food. Around you, fellow travelers shuffle toward the docks. A monk mutters prayers, his hood dripping with mist. A merchant checks and rechecks his purse, as if coins might escape. And a widow clutches a scrap of cloth, said to have touched a saint's bones. Fringe tidbit for you. Relic trading was so popular in this period that people once tried selling milk of the Virgin Mary. Questionable sourcing, to say the least. You stretch your back, hear it crack like a damp log. The gulls wheel above, arguing loudly about nothing in particular, like cousins at a holiday dinner. Someone sneezes nearby, and you try not to think about how colds spread when everyone's packed shoulder to shoulder on a boat. The sky lifts slowly into pale gray, promising neither storm nor sun. You walk toward the gangplank, heart thrumming, uncertain whether this journey will be salvation, punishment, or just a very long rowing workout. The gangplank sways under your step, slick with sea mist, as you shuffle onto the small wooden boat that promises to carry you out into waters wider than your nerves would like. The smell of pitch and tar clings to the planks, as if the boat has been stitched together with the stuff just last night. You run your hand along the railing, sticky in places, reassuring yourself that glue and prayer are enough to hold a vessel afloat. The creak of timbers feels like a groan, or maybe that's just your imagination whispering, "Don't do this." You're not alone, of course. Pilgrimage is nothing if not a group project. A dozen others climb aboard, the monk with his hood still dripping from the morning mist, the merchant who fiddles nervously with his purse, and the widow whose eyes never quite leave the horizon. Each of you is carrying something, a burden, a hope, or maybe just a very bad idea of what counts as fun. The oars rest like patient bones, waiting to be worked until your arms resemble ropes. You squat on the bench, knees touching strangers. The closeness is almost comical, like an early form of budget airline seating, minus the free peanuts. The boat rocks slightly, and you hear someone mutter a prayer under their breath. Another traveler pulls from their pocket a tiny carved charm, a little wooden fish rubbed smooth by fingers. Quirky tidbit here. Some medieval sailors swore by fish bones tied to their clothing to ward off storms. Whether it worked or not, historians still argue whether such talismans were common or mostly inventions of nervous landlubbers. Either way, you suddenly wish you had one too. The oar is placed in your hands. Heavy, damp. You test its weight, imagining the rhythm of strokes you'll soon be forced into. The sea itself is calm for now, a mirror broken only by ripples of gulls landing to squabble over invisible scraps. Your sandals squeak faintly against the deck, and you curl your toes inside, uncertain whether you'll ever see dry land with them again. A salty breeze brushes your cheek, and you taste brine on your lips. You lick it away, realizing quickly it only returns stronger. Like that one friend who insists on telling the same joke at every party. Still, there's a freshness to it, a promise of something beyond the familiar alleys of your town. The bell of the harbor chapel tolls, deep and resonant, as if to send you off with a final blessing, or maybe just a reminder that you're about to row yourself silly. Your companions whisper stories to pass the nervous waiting. The monk explains the route, across this narrow stretch first, then hugging coasts where you can, until Galicia rises out of the mist. He quotes a psalm, his voice steady, though his hands fidget with the rope belt around his waist. The merchant chuckles dryly, claiming he once rode across waters twice as rough, though the way his fingers tighten on his coin pouch betrays his nerves. The widow hums softly, a lullaby in a language you don't quite know, and you find yourself leaning toward the sound as though it might steady the boat itself. The boatman, a leathery figure with skin like tanned hide, clambers aboard last. He checks knots, grunts at the mast, and spits into the sea. He doesn't bother with words. His silence is confidence enough. You study his hands, scarred and rough, and think to yourself, well, at least one person here knows what they're doing. Mainstream fact for Alma, for you. By the 12th century, ports along Spain's northern coast had thriving networks of boatmen who ferried pilgrims across tricky waters, their skills often passed down through families. You cling to this bit of history as comfort, though the way the boat shifts with the tide still makes your stomach lurch. The first push from the dock jolts your spine. The ropes slap loose, and suddenly you're not attached to anything solid anymore. The planks underfoot feel alive, quivering with each wave, each breath of wind. You dip the oar into water, follow the rhythm called by the boatman. 1, 2, 3. The sound of wood cutting through sea becomes your heartbeat. Splash. Lift. Drip. Repeat. Within moments, your shoulders ache, and you try not to think about how many hours stretch ahead. You distract yourself with observation, the coastline pulling away slowly, the rooftops shrinking, the smell of bread ovens fading until all you have left is salt, sweat, and the distant cry of gulls. Your arms settle into a rhythm, but your thoughts wander. You wonder what lies ahead. Muddy roads, endless walking, relics that may or may not cure anything. You also wonder, not without irony, if you'll come home with holier knees or just bigger blisters. Somewhere deep inside, though, you feel a quiet pull. The sense that this absurd journey might matter, that every stroke is an act of devotion or stubbornness, or both. The sky is pale and flat, like unpolished pewter. The waves slap gently for now, but the horizon carries a darker hue. You ignore it, because what else can you do? The merchant cracks a joke about how at least no one is charging extra for checked baggage here, and a ripple of laughter spreads across the benches. It breaks the tension, just a little. Your hands, raw already, tighten around the oar. The boat drifts farther from shore until the line of land is no more than a smudge. You row on, shoulders burning, the sound of water and wood, the only metronome you need. The smell of tar, sweat, and brine folds into the air, wrapping you in the reality that this voyage has truly begun. The oars slide into water with a rhythm that feels both ancient and immediate. You lean forward, shoulders stiff, then pull back, hearing the splash, the drip, the grunt of effort. The boat creaks like an old man complaining about every move, yet it floats, which is really all you can ask of wood and tar. The shore behind you has already shrunk into a blurred line, houses no taller than a thumb's width, smoke from chimneys vanishing into the haze. The sea now stretches in every direction, a wide sheet of pewter glinting under the pale light. The gulls trail behind, curious, shrieking as if mocking your attempt at seafaring. You can almost hear them say, "Look at these landwalkers pretending they belong here." Their cries are sharp, each note stabbing the silence between oar strokes. A few swoop low, wings brushing the air above your head, as if daring you to drop a crumb. The widow beside you clutches her scrap of relic cloth tighter, her knuckles white against the fabric, eyes fixed not on the birds, but on the endless gray horizon. The monk begins humming a psalm, low and steady, words barely audible over the slap of water. His voice is cracked, yet calming, like a well-worn hymn sung from memory rather than perfection. The rhythm of rowing matches the cadence, until for a few minutes, the boat feels like a floating chapel. A merchant interrupts with a sneeze so loud it startles even the gulls, breaking the spell. You stifle a laugh, because really, how could holiness survive in such close quarters? A fact to ground you: pilgrimages by sea were less common than overland treks, but they weren't unheard of. Ports along the Bay of Biscay became hubs where pilgrims gathered, especially when inland roads were dangerous from bandits or war. Still, historians still argue whether most pilgrims truly braved the sea, or if accounts of such voyages were exaggerated for drama. Either way, you're now in the middle of the story, with your arms burning to prove it. You glance down at your hands. Blisters already threaten, tender spots forming on palms unaccustomed to labor this repetitive. You remember your sandals rubbing your heels raw on land, and sigh. Apparently, pilgrimage is designed to punish every body part equally. The oar handle feels slick, both from salt spray and the sweat of a dozen hands before yours. You think of modern gyms and how people today row indoors, staring at televisions or mirrors, and chuckle under your breath. At least you have the real sea, though you'd happily trade it for a treadmill with cup holders. The boat rocks gently, and your stomach flips. The merchant pulls out a small cloth bundle, unwrapping dried figs. He offers one, and you accept gratefully. It tastes like concentrated sunlight, sweet enough to make you close your eyes for a moment. Fringe tidbit: some pilgrims swore by figs as a cure for seasickness, stuffing their mouths with them the moment the waves turned rough. Whether it worked or was just a distraction, no one can say. Still, you chew slowly, pretending you've secured immunity from nausea. The widow finally speaks, her voice low and steady. She tells of a dream she had, where a shining road stretched across the water, leading straight to Santiago's gates. She admits she fears she'll never see it in life, but the dream has carried her this far. Everyone listens, silent for once, oars moving in unison, as if her words have momentarily steadied the sea. Even the gulls seem to quiet, drifting farther back, content to watch without jeering. Above, the clouds part briefly, spilling a shaft of light that gilds the surface in shimmering silver. You pause, letting your oar drag through the glow, watching ripples distort the reflection. For a fleeting instant, it feels as though heaven itself has cracked open to peek at your progress. Then the clouds close again, and the light disappears as quickly as it came. You're left with gray once more, though the memory of brilliance lingers. The monk mutters about omens. The merchant rolls his eyes, insisting it's just weather. Historians still argue whether medieval travelers truly believed natural phenomena carried divine meaning, or if chroniclers embellished these details later. You lean toward believing they did, because even now, with centuries of science, you still find yourself hoping the sunbeam meant something. Your body grows tired, yet the rhythm takes over. 1, 2, breathe, pull. The sound of water lapping against the hull becomes hypnotic, a lullaby sung in liquid syllables. Your eyelids droop, and for a dangerous moment, you nearly nod off, letting the oar slip. A splash wakes you, and laughter erupts from the merchant, who teases you for dozing mid-stroke. You grin sheepishly. Joke number 1. At least if you fall asleep rowing, you'll drift closer to Santiago, right? The boatman finally speaks, voice gravelly as a storm. Keep steady, he says, not looking at anyone in particular. His command sharpens spines, oars fall into cleaner unison, and the boat slides forward with surprising grace. You sense his authority comes not from words, but from years spent battling waters you can hardly imagine. Mainstream fact: experienced mariners in medieval ports often doubled as guides, their practical knowledge more valuable than any map, since coastlines changed with storms and sands. You feel lucky to have one aboard, even if he only spares 3 words an hour. Your legs cramp. You stretch one beneath the bench, toes brushing against another pilgrim's ankle. Neither of you apologize. Space is too scarce to pretend at politeness. The smell of bodies mixes with tar and salt, creating a human soup that will only grow stronger as hours stretch on. Still, you find comfort in the closeness. At least you're not alone in this madness. The widow resumes humming, softer this time, and you let the sound carry you forward. The rhythm of rowing melds with her tune until it feels less like labor and more like being part of something larger. An orchestra of creaks, splashes, breaths, and human hope. Your arms throb, your back protests, but the boat moves, and with each stroke, land fades further behind. Ahead, only water waits, indifferent and endless. You close your eyes, breathe salt and song, and row. Salt stings your lips as another spray drifts over the boat, fine as mist, clinging to your skin and settling in your hair until you feel crusted like a cured fish. You lean into the oar, your shoulders screaming in protest, your hands raw where blisters bloom and threaten to burst. Still, you keep rowing. Every splash and pull becomes part of an endless chant, as though the sea itself demands a prayer made of muscle. The monk opposite you watches the horizon with a half smile, though sweat rolls freely down his face. Each stroke is penance, he murmurs, his voice nearly swallowed by the water's slap. You want to tell him each stroke is also torture, but you save your breath for rowing. Somewhere behind him, the merchant coughs, a hacking sound that earns a few nervous glances. In such cramped quarters, every sneeze or cough becomes a miniature drama. One cold could spread like wildfire among a dozen weary pilgrims. The gulls have long vanished, replaced by nothing but open water. The world shrinks to 3 things: sky, sea, and the aching rhythm of your body. Yet small details still tug at your attention. A line of seaweed drifts by, tangled and glistening, as if it were cast-off clothing from some ancient drowned sailor. A jellyfish bobs past, translucent and alien, pulsing as though it breathes. You remember reading or hearing that some monks described such creatures as souls adrift in purgatory. Historians still argue whether this was a metaphor, a superstition, or just evidence that medieval writers were as sleep-deprived as you feel now. The widow clutches her relic scrap tighter, her lips moving in silent prayer. Her eyes are wide, unblinking, as though the sea might lunge at her if she dares look away. To distract yourself, you try humor. "If we make it to Santiago alive," you whisper, "I'm demanding an upgrade to first class." She almost smiles, and that alone feels like a victory. Joke number 1. Medieval air miles clearly left something to be desired. The boatman prowls the deck, his bare feet blackened with tar and salt. He eyes the clouds, mutters to himself, then spits again into the sea. His face is unreadable, but his silence feels heavier now. You glance upward. The sky, once a soft pewter, has thickened into darker gray, bruised at the edges. You wonder if storms are inevitable, or if perhaps the sea is simply teasing. Mainstream fact: the Bay of Biscay was notorious for sudden squalls that could overturn even sturdy vessels, making sailors wary of journeys without clear skies. You begin to understand why. Another spray hits you square in the face, this one sharp enough to sting your eyes. You sputter, wipe your cheeks with a sleeve already damp from sweat. The monk chuckles gently. "Baptism, round 2, he says, and you manage a weak grin. But beneath the banter, you sense nerves growing. Every rower feels it. The shift in wind, the deepening wuss. The merchant grips his oar tighter, his knuckles white, as if sheer force might keep the sea in place. The rhythm falters. A wave lifts the boat sharply, then drops it with a smack that rattles your teeth. The widow gasps, clutching at the bench. Your stomach flips like a pancake on a skillet, and you force yourself not to think of figs or cures. Joke number 2. If seasickness really counted as penance, you'd be absolved twice over by now. The boatman finally raises his voice, hoarse and sharp. "Row steady! Keep her nose forward!" The command jolts everyone back into rhythm, though uneven strokes make the vessel wobble like a drunk staggering down a street. You dig deep, pulling harder, feeling muscles scream louder. Sweat mingles with salt water, trickling into your eyes until the world blurs. A memory surfaces. A tavern story about sailors smearing tar on their hands to prevent blisters. It sounded ridiculous then, but now you wish you'd tried it. Fringe tidbit. Some sailors even swore by rubbing pig fat onto their palms for grip. Practical, if not exactly fragrant. You picture the widow solemnly carrying a jar of pig fat in her satchel and nearly laugh aloud. The waves grow taller, their crests frothing white. The boat climbs and dips, each descent like the drop of a carnival ride, designed by someone with no regard for human comfort. You cling to the oar, heart pounding. Around you, prayers rise louder, half in Latin, half in muttered local dialects. Fear makes linguists of everyone, able to summon words they thought long forgotten. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims saw storms as divine punishment or simply as the ocean's way of thinning the herd. You decide it doesn't matter. Punishment or nature, both feel equally personal when you're sitting in a wooden bathtub on the open sea. Then, as quickly as it built, the squall hesitates. The wind drops slightly, the rain slackens, and the boat rocks into a slower rhythm. Breath comes back in gulps. muscles loosen just enough for shoulders to sag. The widow sobs once, quietly, then steadies herself. The merchant, cheeks pale, mutters something about never sailing again, though everyone knows he'll have to before this journey is done. The boatman resumes prowling, expression unreadable, but he nods once, almost imperceptibly. It feels like a blessing. You sag against the bench, letting the oar rest across your knees. Your arms tremble from fatigue, but relief washes through you. The sea, fickle as it is, has decided, for now, not to swallow you whole. And yet, the horizon remains dark, promising more tests to come. You breathe deeply, tasting salt, sweat, and the faintest hint of hope. Joke number 3. Maybe by the end of this, you'll have arms sculpted enough to impress a saint. For now, you lift the oar again, settle into the rhythm, and row. The sea calms into something almost gentle, though your arms still tremble from the strain. The boat, once jerking and pitching like a stubborn mule, now glides more smoothly across the gray surface. You exhale through your nose, a slow release, as though letting go of fear in measured streams. Your fellow rowers seem to do the same. Shoulders slump, eyes soften, and voices rise again in low chatter. Human beings, after all, can only sustain terror for so long before curiosity sneaks back in. The merchant, cheeks still pale, clears his throat. "I once crossed to England," he says, "and the seas were no kinder." His voice carries a forced steadiness, a tone that begs to be believed. No one calls him out, though the monk tilts his head with a polite half-smile that says, "Sure you did." The widow looks unconvinced, her hand clutching her relic cloth like a lifeline. Yet his story serves its purpose. Distraction. You find yourself leaning closer, eager to hear any tale that takes your mind off the oar's weight. His account grows wilder as he speaks. Ships vanishing under sudden swells, sailors who swore they saw ghostly lights dancing on their mast tips, and a captain who carried a live rooster for luck. Fringe tidbit for you. Medieval sailors sometimes did keep roosters aboard, not just for luck, but to serve as a natural alarm clock. Imagine waking every dawn to frantic crowing in the middle of an already stressful sea voyage. You chuckle, half from amusement, half from exhaustion, and the merchant beams as though his tale has earned him sainthood. The monk then adds his own story. He tells of St. James appearing in visions to lost pilgrims, guiding them with a staff that shone like fire. His tone is calm, almost dreamy, but his eyes dart to the horizon often, as if hoping for a fiery staff himself. Historians still argue whether such tales of miraculous guidance were rooted in truth, symbolism, or pure invention by chroniclers trying to sell the pilgrimage route. Either way, the story settles warmly into the air, like incense in a chapel. You row on, shoulders finding a rhythm again. The sound of wood against water becomes hypnotic, a steady companion to the stories. Your hands ache, blisters swelling under the skin, but you push through. Pilgrimage is, after all, designed to hurt, though you suspect medieval organizers didn't intend for it to feel like an extended arm workout. Joke number 1. If you live through this, you'll deserve a badge that says, "World's First Nautical Gym Member." The widow finally speaks, her voice low but steady. She shares not a grand tale, but a small, quiet reason for her journey. A prayer for her lost child. The boat stills in mood as her words drift among you. Even the merchant lowers his eyes, shame softening the edges of his bravado. Her grief becomes a weight heavier than any oar, pressing into the air, demanding silence. You bow your head slightly, not because anyone orders it, but because reverence comes naturally in the presence of sorrow. The boatman clears his throat, a gravelly rasp that shakes the solemnity just enough. "Row," he says simply, and the rhythm resumes. His reminder is blunt but necessary. Life does not pause, even for grief. The sea expects movement, and movement is survival. Your eyes wander over the deck, catching details you had missed before. The tar caulking between planks, dark as spilled ink. The ropes coiled neatly, though damp with spray. The faint smell of pitch clinging like smoke on your clothes. Mainstream fact. Shipbuilding in the medieval world relied heavily on tar and pitch, not only to seal vessels, but to ward off rot and worms. Without it, a boat could fall apart in months. You run your hand across the sticky edge of the bench and silently thank the nameless workers who prepared this fragile craft. Time stretches strangely at sea. Minutes feel like hours, hours like days. You lose track of how long you've been rowing. The horizon never changes, always distant, always unreachable. Fatigue numbs your arms until they move mechanically, your body reduced to levers and pulleys. Yet within that monotony, your senses sharpen. You notice the subtle hiss of waves under the hull, the faint groan of wood as it flexes, the soft rasp of breath from the widow at your side. The merchant breaks the silence again, this time with a joke. "If Santiago doesn't bless us for this," he mutters, "he owes us at least a free supper." A ripple of laughter spreads, lighter this time. Easier. Joke number 2. Free supper or not, you know you'd settle for dry bread that isn't seasoned with seawater. The monk counters by reminding him that pilgrimage is not about comfort, but devotion. Yet even he cannot keep the corners of his mouth from twitching upward. Humor has a way of sneaking past solemnity, much like seawater past tar. A sudden splash draws everyone's eyes. A fish leaps briefly from the waves, glistening silver before vanishing again. The widow gasps, and the monk whispers something about signs of providence. You just think the fish looked annoyed to have company on its patch of ocean. Still, the moment lightens the boat again. Proof that even in endless gray, life moves unseen beneath the surface. As the day lengthens, the boatman announces a brief rest. Oars rise, dripping, and arms sag with relief. You flex your fingers, grimace at the sight of forming blisters, and stretch your back. The widow offers a strip of dried apple, and you accept gratefully. Its sweetness cuts through salt and sweat, making you feel briefly human again. Historians still argue whether food for such voyages was shared communally or hoarded privately. Judging by the merchant's reluctance to pass around his figs earlier, you suspect both versions are true. But in this moment, the apple slice feels like communion, a reminder that kindness survives even on cramped benches. The sea remains calm, though the sky holds its bruised hue. You know storms may return, but for now, the boat glides. Muscles ache, stories ebb and flow, and silence fills the spaces between. Joke number 3. You realize you've officially survived long enough to miss walking. The irony of yearning for blisters on land makes you grin, even as you pick up the oar again. The horizon waits, unchanged, but somehow closer in spirit. You row, shoulders burning, heart steady, carried forward by stories, sorrow, and the faintest thread of hope. The sea has decided to toy with you. One moment, it seems almost forgiving. Smooth ripples, shimmering like polished slate under the pale sky. Then, with the next stroke of your oar, it delivers a sudden slap of spray across your face. Salt crusts on your lips, your skin sticky, your tunic heavy with damp. You lean into the oar anyway, because to stop is to drift, and drifting feels like surrender. Your body is sore, but your mind wanders, seeking small escapes. You study your companions more closely. The monk, still humming psalms, has let his hood slip back. His scalp is sunburned in a neat circle, proof that baldness existed long before electric razors. The merchant has begun talking again, though this time his voice is softer, less brag and more confession. He tells of debts, of failed ventures, of hoping Compostela might offer him a clean slate. You almost snort. If Santiago truly forgave poor business choices, the cathedral would have collapsed under the weight of merchants years ago. Joke number 1. Somewhere, a medieval accountant is still waiting for divine debt cancellation. The widow sits quietly, her eyes downcast, her hands folded over her relic cloth. Yet you notice how often she glances at the monk, as if his muttering is a rope she can grip in stormy waters. Faith, for her, is not an abstract virtue. It's survival. Her presence reminds you that pilgrimages were not just vacations for the devout. They were lifelines for people carrying grief too heavy to bear at home. Mainstream fact: by the 12th century, Compostela had become one of the 3 great Christian pilgrimage sites, alongside Rome and Jerusalem. For many, it was the most attainable of the 3, though attainable here means you only had to risk drowning, robbery, disease, and bankruptcy. A bargain, really. The boatman prowls again, inspecting the ropes, his silence a steadying presence. His eyes never leave the clouds, which are shifting like ink dispersing in water. You follow his gaze and feel your stomach tighten. Dark streaks stretch across the horizon, and the wind nips sharper at your cheeks. You don't need his experience to know what this means. Still, the merchant tries to lighten the mood. He pulls a small leather pouch from his belt, unties it, and reveals, of all things, dried cherries. He pops one into his mouth, then offers the pouch around. You take one. Its tart sweetness cutting through the taste of salt. Fringe tidbit: cherries were considered both luxury and medicine in the Middle Ages, sometimes prescribed for gout. You wonder whether the merchant carries them for his joints or his soul. Either way, the taste is a miracle in this floating barrel of sweat and tar. The monk politely declines, muttering about fasting. The widow shakes her head too, though her eyes linger on the pouch. You sneak her another cherry when the merchant isn't looking. She accepts it with a quick smile, brief as sunlight on water. Rowing resumes. The rhythm steadies again. Splash, lift, drip. You fall into a half-trance, the repetition lulling you into strange thoughts. The sea's surface reminds you of silk, endless bolts of it, unrolling in every direction. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims found the sea terrifying or beautiful. But in this moment, you understand how it could be both. You feel small, absurdly fragile, yet also part of something vast, stitched into the fabric of waves. A sudden gust snaps you back to reality. The boat lurches, oars clatter, and someone curses under their breath, though politely enough to keep it PG for a saint's hearing. The widow gasps, clutching the bench. The merchant nearly drops his pouch of cherries, fumbling to save it like a man rescuing treasure. The boatman barks a single word: "Row!" And row you do. The sky thickens into bruised gray again, wind tugging at your hood, spray whipping harder across your face. The waves no longer slap playfully, but roll with intent, lifting the boat higher than comfort allows. Each descent rattles your teeth. Each climb sends your stomach chasing gravity. The monk's psalm grows louder, steadier, as though daring the storm to try him. Joke number 2. If monks doubled as metronomes, ship travel would have been much safer. You find yourself rowing in time with his chant, grateful for the rhythm, even as your arms scream. The widow begins humming again too, her tune weaving with the psalm until the sound rises above the creaking planks. The merchant, to everyone's surprise, joins in with a rough baritone, singing something that may or may not be holy, but carries enough conviction to count. The boat feels less like a fragile raft and more like a choir adrift, voices binding you against the storm. Mainstream fact: communal singing was often used on long journeys, not just for worship, but to keep rhythm during hard labor. From rowing galleys to plowing fields, songs carried bodies forward when muscles wanted to stop. You now understand why. Still, the storm presses. Rain spits harder, slicing into your skin. The waves rear up, each crest blotting out the horizon, each trough threatening to swallow you. Your grip tightens on the oar, fingers numb, palms blistered raw. You focus on small details to stay sane. The hiss of rain on wood, the glint of foam in lightning's brief flash, the monk's steady voice, the widow's trembling breath. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims viewed storms as tests of faith or signs of divine wrath. In this moment, you'd settle for either, so long as the test comes with a passing grade. You pull harder, lungs burning, each stroke a plea whispered into the roaring wind. Then, suddenly, it eases, not completely, but enough. But the rain softens, the waves settle into smaller swells, and the wind shifts back to something survivable. Breathless, soaked, and aching, you slump against the bench. Around you, others do the same. The widow weeps quietly, relief spilling faster than tears. The merchant wipes his face, muttering about how cherries are definitely good luck. Joke number 3. You consider making an offering of your blisters when you reach Santiago, since they already qualify as relics in your opinion. The boatman spits again into the sea, then nods once, as if satisfied. The storm has passed, for now. You grip the oar again, resigned to row on. The sea, after all, isn't done with you yet. Night lowers itself over the water like a heavy curtain, turning the sea from pewter to black silk. The day's haze dissolves into shadows, and with it goes any illusion of safety you felt beneath the dull light. The boat rocks in calmer swells now, though every creak of the hull sounds louder in the dark. Lanterns are lit, faint flames flickering behind soot-smudged glass, their glow too weak to do more than sketch pale halos around faces. Everything beyond those circles of light is swallowed by the abyss. You shift on the bench, legs cramped from hours of rowing. When the boatman finally called for rest, your arms dangled like ropes, your hands throbbing with pain from raw blisters. You flex your fingers now, wincing as skin splits a little at the joints. The monk notices, wordless, and passes you a strip of cloth torn from his robe. You wrap it around your palm, grateful, though you wonder whether he'll be asking Santiago to forgive him for ruining church property later. The merchant lies back against the side of the boat, eyes closed, muttering about sore muscles and cramped ribs. His voice carries the exaggerated groan of a man hoping everyone knows just how much he's suffering. Joke number 1. If pilgrim bragging rights were measured in complaints per minute, he'd already qualify for sainthood. The widow sits opposite you, still cradling her relic cloth, though exhaustion has finally softened her grip. Her eyes flutter shut, her lips moving in whispered prayers, even as she drifts into half-sleep. Above you, the sky blooms with stars. No candle, no lantern, no cathedral window could compare. The night is clear enough to reveal entire rivers of light. Constellations crossing overhead with careless brilliance. You tilt your head back, breath catching. The Milky Way stretches from one horizon to the other, luminous and endless. You recall that many medieval pilgrims called it the Camino de Santiago, a heavenly road guiding the faithful westward. Mainstream fact. This association was so strong that some chroniclers claimed the earthly pilgrimage mirrored the celestial path. You imagine for a moment that you are rowing along that glittering highway, your oar strokes echoing in the heavens. Historians still argue whether most common pilgrims even noticed the stars, or if that was a poetic flourish later added by writers. But staring upward, neck aching, you know the sight alone could have launched 1,000 stories. The night air is sharp with salt, cool against your damp skin, but you feel almost lifted by the expanse above. Someone coughs, dragging your eyes downward. The merchant, restless, begins to tell another tale. This one about a sailor who claimed the sea at night glowed with phantom fire. Fringe tidbit: medieval accounts do describe burning seas, which modern science now calls bioluminescence. Tiny organisms light up when disturbed, turning waves into living lanterns. You squint into the water, half hoping to see the glow yourself. But tonight, the sea remains stubbornly black. The monk chuckles softly at the merchant's story. Or perhaps the sea is simply haunted, he suggests. His tone is light, but the widow makes a sign of the cross. For her, jesting about hauntings is no laughing matter. The air thickens with unease, silence stretching too long. To break it, you lean forward and whisper, "If the sea wants to scare us, it'll have to try harder. I've already seen the merchant's bare feet." Laughter ripples around the boat, even from the widow, who hides her smile behind her sleeve. Joke number 2. Fear is powerful, but so is teasing a friend's questionable hygiene. The boat drifts under steady oars, though no one rows with much vigor. Fatigue settles heavy, pulling at muscles, at eyelids, at patience. The boatman allows a slower pace, perhaps recognizing that exhaustion can sink a vessel as surely as any storm. You fall into rhythm with the widow beside you, your oars dipping and lifting in quiet synchrony. Her humming begins again, soft as breath, weaving into the sound of waves. Your body aches, but the stillness of night lends a strange peace. You focus on small details to stay awake. The smell of pitch lingering in the planks, the faint squeak of wood where rope rubs against mast, the sharp snap of sails shifting in the breeze. Every sound is amplified by darkness, each one a reminder that the sea never truly sleeps. Mainstream fact: many medieval sailors navigated by stars, relying on constellations like the North Star to guide their paths. The knowledge passed orally, guarded within families, because charts and compasses were rare luxuries. You glance upward again, spotting the bright point of Polaris. It steadies you, a fixed light amid endless motion. The widow whispers suddenly, startling you. "Do you hear it?" she asks. You tilt your head, straining. At first only waves. Then, faintly, a low moan. Not human, not quite natural either. It rises and falls with the swell of the sea, mournful as a lost choir. The monk murmurs that it is only the wind through the mast, but the merchant insists it's the souls of drowned sailors. Historians still argue whether medieval travelers interpreted every strange noise as supernatural. But here, in the darkness, you understand why they did. You grip your oar tighter, reassuring yourself with action. Stroke, lift, drip. The sound is steady, human, controllable. You focus on that, letting the eerie moan blend into background noise. Time drags. Minutes bleed into hours. Or maybe hours shrink into minutes. You can't tell anymore. Fatigue dulls your sense of sequence. You fight sleep, head bobbing, arms moving automatically. Around you, others nod off in fits, jerking awake when the boat tips. The merchant snores softly, a nasal drone that competes with the monk's psalm. Joke number 3. If the storm didn't sink you, the snoring just might. Your mind drifts into half-dreams. You imagine the stars as lanterns carried by saints, walking a road above, watching your tiny vessel below. You imagine Santiago himself leaning over the heavens, shaking his head at the sight of a dozen weary pilgrims packed like sardines. You smile faintly at the thought, then blink hard, fighting drowsiness. The boatman finally calls for rest. Oars lift, dripping in the starlight. You sag against the bench, arms numb, palms torn. The boat rocks gently, almost soothing, and for a moment you allow yourself to close your eyes. The sea sighs beneath you, the stars blaze above, and exhaustion pulls you under like a blanket. Morning announces itself not with trumpets, but with dampness. A thin drizzle drifts down from a sky the color of dull lead, seeping into your clothes, your hair, your bones. You blink awake on the bench, neck stiff from sleeping upright, your cheek creased by the grain of the wood. Around you, the boat stirs with weary bodies. The merchant groans as if announcing his survival requires applause. The widow rubs her eyes, her relic cloth still clutched firmly in one hand, creased now with sweat and salt. The monk stretches his arms skyward, murmuring a prayer that might be thanksgiving or just a plea for stronger shoulders. The oars are pressed back into your hands, damp and heavy. The skin of your palms screams as you grip the worn wood, blisters swollen, raw, and torn. You try to adjust your hold, but there is no comfortable way to grasp a tool designed to strip your hands bare. The boatman growls his usual command, row, and rhythm returns, though slower, weighted by fatigue. Each stroke drags through the water like lifting stones from mud. The sea, however, is not as forgiving as it was under the stars. The drizzle thickens into steady rain, thin sheets that sweep across the deck. The droplets sting against your cheeks and collect at the collar of your tunic, trickling cold rivulets down your spine. You shiver, breath fogging in the chill. The merchant sneezes, loud and unrestrained, and several heads swivel toward him, with equal parts sympathy and dread. Joke number 1. If medieval quarantine rules existed on boats, he'd already be tossed overboard. The widow hums softly to herself again, her voice barely audible beneath the rain's hiss. The tune wavers like the boat, fragile yet persistent. It weaves into the sound of dripping water, into the creak of the hull, into the rhythm of oars. You realize you've come to depend on her humming, an anchor of humanity in the monotony of sea and storm. Mainstream fact. Many pilgrim ships of the Middle Ages were small coastal vessels, built to hug the shoreline rather than face open seas. Storms often forced them into ports for days at a time, waiting for calmer weather. You silently wish for such a port now, though the horizon offers nothing but rolling gray. The monk begins a tale to keep spirits from sinking faster than the boat. He speaks of relics at Santiago, bones said to be of the Apostle James himself. Pilgrims touch them for blessings, believing miracles follow. His voice steadies with the telling, his words lifting slightly above the rain. The widow leans in, listening as though each syllable feeds her strength. The merchant, however, mutters that bones look like bones, and how can anyone really tell? Historians still argue the same point. Are the relics genuine, or simply relics by reputation? The debate feels endless, yet here on the water, belief matters more than proof. The boatman spits into the sea again, an act you've learned to interpret as either superstition or weather forecast. His eyes scan the clouds, his brow furrowed. You follow his gaze, noticing how the horizon darkens into something almost black. Waves gather height, their crests foaming white, their troughs yawning like open mouths. You brace instinctively, your grip tightening despite the pain. The rain grows heavier, pelting down in slanted sheets that blur vision. The merchant curses, clutching his pouch of cherries as though divine salvation rests within. The widow gasps and clutches her relic, lips moving faster in prayer. The monk raises his voice, chanting louder, his psalm nearly drowned by the roar of water. The storm slams into you with sudden force. A wave crashes against the hull, drenching everyone in a single cold sweep. The boat shudders, planks groaning. You throw your weight against the oar, pulling hard, your muscles screaming, your lungs heaving. Lightning splits the sky, a jagged scar of white that illuminates terrified faces for the briefest second before plunging everything back into shadow. The widow screams as another wave crashes, soaking her through. The merchant yells something incoherent, though it sounds suspiciously like bargaining with saints. Joke number 2. Apparently, his theology is based on whichever saint offers the quickest refund. You row harder, each stroke a desperate act against chaos. The boat rises on a swell, then plunges into a trough so deep your stomach lurches. Water sloshes across the deck, pooling around your ankles, icy and relentless. You glance at the boatman, who shouts commands you barely understand, his voice shredded by wind. Still, you follow, oars plunging, pulling, lifting, keeping the nose of the boat forward. Mainstream fact. Sailors in medieval Europe often carried simple compasses by the 13th century, but coastal navigators relied more on landmarks and stars. In storms like this, compasses were useless. Survival depended solely on skill and stubborn endurance. You pray silently that the boatman has both in abundance. The widow resumes humming, louder now, though her voice trembles. The tune clashes against thunder, fragile but defiant. The monk joins her with his psalm, and soon their voices braid together, creating a sound that cuts through even the storm's fury. You row to that rhythm, clinging to it as if it were rope. Historians still argue whether pilgrims viewed storms as punishments for sin or tests of devotion. You think neither matters. In the moment, the storm is simply power, indifferent and overwhelming. Your arms burn, your chest heaves, but you refuse to let go of the oar. Each stroke becomes less about reaching Santiago and more about not sinking into the black abyss beneath you. Then, as abruptly as it began, the fury slackens. The rain eases to drizzle. The waves shrink from walls to hills. The thunder rumbles farther away. Your breath comes in ragged gulps, your body trembling with exhaustion. Around you, others slump in relief, some sobbing, some laughing hysterically. The merchant clutches his cherries with the devotion of a monk. The widow collapses against the bench, her hum fading into quiet weeping. Joke number 3. You decide that if Santiago doesn't grant extra blessings for surviving seasickness and storms, you'll personally file a complaint at the cathedral. The boatman spits into the sea once more, then nods, satisfied. The worst has passed, for now. You grip the oar again, shoulders aching, and row on, because the sea allows no rest, not even after survival. Land appears first as a smudge on the horizon, a darker line beneath the gray wash of clouds. At first you think your eyes are playing tricks, seeing what you wish for instead of what exists. But slowly, as the boat creeps forward under weary oars, the smudge sharpens into ridges, then hills, then the faint outline of trees. A murmur spreads among the pilgrims. Relief, disbelief, exhaustion, given voice. The widow presses her hands together, whispering thanks through chapped lips. The merchant sighs so loudly it could pass for a horn announcing victory. Even the monk allows himself a smile, thin but genuine. The boatman does not smile. His eyes stay fixed on the coastline, calculating currents, judging rocks hidden beneath the surface. He spits once, then mutters a few words you cannot catch. You sense the landing will not be as easy as your hopeful eyes wish. The oars dig deeper, steady rhythm pounding through aching arms. Each stroke inches you closer, but the sea resists, tugging at the hull with sly fingers. Closer now, you smell earth beneath the salt, the scent of wet soil and pine, carried faintly on the breeze. It is richer than incense, stronger than bread, grounding you after days adrift. You inhale deeply, greedily, as though breath alone might plant your feet back on solid ground. Joke number 1. If air could be bottled and sold, you'd happily buy a barrel labeled "Not Ocean." Mainstream fact: Galicia's coast, rugged and irregular, often forced sailors to land in coves or river mouths rather than broad beaches. Pilgrim ships sometimes had to wait for tides to rise high enough to enter safely. You pray your boatman knows these waters, though his narrowed eyes and tense shoulders suggest every approach is a gamble. The waves grow choppier as you near shore, rebounding against unseen rocks. The boat jerks sideways, water slapping the hull with impatient force. Pilgrims gasp, clutching benches, relics, or each other. The monk tightens his grip on his rope belt, whispering a psalm that rises above the crash of surf. Historians still argue whether psalms were sung as practical prayers for divine aid, or simply as a way to steady nerves. In this moment, you understand they serve both purposes well. The widow begins to hum again, her tune softer than the storm, but steadier than the waves. Her voice threads through the chaos like a lifeline, and soon others hum with her, creating a fragile harmony that floats above the noise of sea. The merchant, surprisingly tuneful, joins in too, though halfway through, he interrupts himself with a sneeze. Laughter ripples despite the danger, a reminder that even soaked, bruised, and half sick, people cling to humor. Joke number 2. If saints keep score, sneezes during hymns must count as bonus prayers. The coastline sharpens further. You see pines bowing under drizzle, fields stitched in shades of green, and, faintly, the white spire of a chapel near the shore. The sight steadies your breath, proof that faith has physical anchors on land, not just in memory. The boatman shouts a command, and oars dig deeper, turning the vessel toward a narrow cove where the waves break less violently. Spray lashes your face, stinging eyes and lips, but you row harder, every muscle screaming, every thought fixed on setting foot on earth again. The hull scrapes against gravel, shuddering through your bones. The boat lurches, nearly tipping, then to Buetes, as the boatman leaps forward with rope in hand. He splashes into waist-deep water, securing the vessel to a rock with practiced ease. His movements are precise, economical, born of years repeating this same ritual. He does not look back at you, as though tying the rope matters more than the dozen lives still trembling on the deck. Silence falls briefly. No one moves, as if afraid the ground might dissolve like a dream. Then, slowly, pilgrims shuffle forward. The merchant is first, of course, stumbling over the bench, nearly falling into the surf before scrambling onto shore with a triumphant shout. The widow follows more carefully, clutching her relic and lifting her skirts to keep them from the water. The monk helps another pilgrim down, his hands steady despite his own exhaustion. You rise last, your legs trembling, knees stiff from days cramped on the bench. The planks creak under your weight as you step toward the side. Cold water rushes around your ankles as you slide into the surf. Your sandals sink into wet sand, the ground uneven, yet blessedly solid. You nearly collapse from the relief of it, though pride keeps your spine upright. The earth smells stronger now, pine and soil mixing with brine, a perfume of survival. You press your toes deeper, as if to reassure yourself it will not vanish. Mainstream fact. Many accounts describe pilgrims kissing the ground upon arrival, a gesture of gratitude and humility. You do not kiss it, though the thought tempts you. Instead, you bend, scoop a handful of wet sand, and let it run through your fingers. Each grain is proof that you have not been swallowed by the sea. The merchant boasts loudly, declaring himself a man of both sea and land now, though his knees still shake. The widow kneels silently, lips pressed to her relic. The monk lifts his hand skyward, thanking heaven in a voice that carries over the waves. Historians still argue whether most pilgrims truly felt transformed upon landing, or if they simply felt relieved. Standing there, soaked and aching, you suspect the two feelings are often the same. The boatman drags the vessel higher, anchoring it firmly. He spares you all one glance, brief but approving, before turning back to his work. His silence remains unbroken, but in his eyes you glimpse recognition. You have endured, and for that, you are worthy of the next leg. You step farther onto the beach, leaving the surf behind. The ground is slick with rain, your sandals squelching in mud, but the sensation thrills you nonetheless. Every drop of water clinging to your clothes now feels lighter, as though land itself shares the burden. You look toward the trees, dark and welcoming, their branches swaying in mist. Beyond them lies the path to Compostela, winding inland through hills and forests. Joke number 3. After days on a boat, even mud feels like luxury flooring. You would gladly write a glowing review for Galicia Mud Spa, 5 stars, highly recommended. The drizzle softens, and a pale light breaks through clouds, illuminating the spire of the distant chapel. It gleams faintly, a promise waiting on the horizon. You draw a slow breath, shoulders easing, heart steadying. The sea has released you, but the journey is far from over. The road inland begins as a muddy track, carved not by design, but by centuries of trudging feet. Your sandals squelch with every step, sucking against the wet earth as though the ground itself wants you back on the boat. The merchant curses the mud, muttering about ruined leather, while the monk remarks that the struggle is good for the soul. The widow simply lowers her head and presses forward, her pace steady, her grip on her relic firm. The air is thick with the scent of pine and damp moss, richer than anything you breathed at sea. Birds call unseen in the canopy above, their voices sharp and lively after days of gulls and storms. You tilt your head back, watching branches sway in the breeze, drops of rain tumbling from needles to your shoulders. It feels strange to be shaded again, to have sky broken into patches rather than a single endless dome. Mainstream fact: many medieval pilgrims entered Galicia by following the rivers and roads that led to Santiago, paths that would later be formalized into the Camino Frances. What began as scattered trails gradually became arteries of faith, carrying thousands of weary bodies year after year. Historians still argue whether the routes were originally chosen for safety, access to monasteries, or simple convenience, but each explanation fits as well as mud fits between your toes. The merchant tries to distract everyone by boasting again. This time, he recounts how he once sold wool in Bruges and dined with a man who claimed to be a cousin of a duke. You suspect the cousin was more likely a distant acquaintance of someone who once polished the duke's boots, but you let the story run its course. Joke number 1. If bragging were a commodity, the merchant would be the richest man alive. The widow interrupts softly, pointing out wildflowers blooming at the roadside. Tiny blossoms of yellow and purple push through the muck as if determined to defy the weather. Her eyes brighten for the first time in days, and you find yourself smiling with her. Even the monk pauses to remark on their beauty, quoting a psalm about lilies clothed in splendor. The merchant rolls his eyes but keeps walking, probably wishing flowers could be taxed. The mud grows thicker as the road narrows, winding uphill between stone walls. You slip once, catching yourself with a hand against cold granite. Your palm stings, reminding you of the blisters still raw from rowing. Every step grinds ache into your thighs, your body protesting this new form of punishment. You recall the boat's endless rowing and realize land is no kinder than sea, just different in the ways it hurts. Fringe tidbit: some pilgrims wore iron chains or carried heavy stones as acts of penance along the road. You glance at your mud-caked sandals and blistered hands and think, why bother with chains when the journey itself provides enough misery? The monk keeps a steady chant under his breath, his pace unbroken despite the incline. The widow hums again, her melody blending with the sound of dripping leaves. The merchant pants loudly, though he insists he's saving energy for storytelling. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims traveled mostly in silence or in constant chatter. But in your group, silence and chatter weave together like rain and sunshine, neither lasting long on its own. As you climb higher, the forest opens briefly onto a ridge. You pause, breathless, as the view spills wide. Rolling hills, draped in mist, valleys stitched with fields, distant villages clinging to slopes. The widow gasps, her eyes wet with something beyond fatigue. The monk crosses himself, murmuring thanks. Even the merchant falls quiet, his boastful words stilled by the vastness. You breathe deeply, the air sharp and clean, filled with scents of wet earth, pine, and distant smoke. It feels like drinking after thirst, like standing in a cathedral with no roof. Joke number 2. If you could bottle this view, you'd sell it to tired pilgrims for twice the price of cherries. The road winds down again, slippery with rain. You steady yourself against the wall, boots sliding in muck. The widow nearly falls, and you catch her arm, her relic clutched tightly between you. She nods in thanks, her voice too soft to carry words. The monk helps another stumble, his presence as steady as the rope belt at his waist. The merchant mutters something about ruined clothing, but keeps moving, his pace more cautious now. You pass a small shrine by the roadside, a weathered cross set in stone. Candles, long extinguished, leave wax pooled at its base. The monk bows his head, whispering a blessing. The widow kneels briefly, touching her relic to the stone. The merchant tosses a cherry pit at the base, muttering about offerings. You shake your head, half amused, half scandalized. Historians still argue whether roadside shrines were built by locals for profit, devotion, or both. Looking at the worn stone, you decide the answer doesn't matter. Pilgrims will kneel regardless. The rain lightens as the day stretches on, clouds thinning to reveal a pale sun. The road dries slightly, though mud still clings stubbornly to your sandals. Your legs ache with every step, but the rhythm of walking feels oddly comforting after days of rowing. Each stride is a reminder that movement carries you forward, no matter the form it takes. By afternoon, you reach a village. Smoke curls from chimneys, and the smell of baking bread drifts down the lane. Children peer from doorways, their eyes wide at the sight of mud-caked strangers. A woman offers a jug of water, her face lined with sympathy. The widow drinks gratefully. The monk bows deeply. The merchant tries to haggle for more cherries, and you simply savor the taste of water that isn't salted. Joke number 3. You realize medieval marketing was easy. Just wave a loaf of bread at starving pilgrims, and you've guaranteed repeat customers. As evening nears, you find a place to rest, a crude shelter of timber and thatch offered by villagers. The floor is straw, damp but soft compared to a wooden bench. You sink down, bones aching, muscles humming with fatigue. The widow curls quietly near the fire. The monk continues his prayers. The merchant snores almost instantly. You stare into the flames, watching sparks drift upward like tiny stars, and feel the day's journey settle into your bones. Outside, the road continues, stretching toward Compostela. Tomorrow, you will rise and walk again. For now, you let the fire's warmth seep into your body, easing the ache of sea and mud alike. Dawn creeps into the shelter as a pale glow through the thatch roof, highlighting dust motes drifting like tiny pilgrims of their own. You stir from uneasy sleep, straw sticking to your cheek, your back stiff from the uneven floor. The widow is already awake, tending to her relic cloth, with the reverence of one polishing treasure. The monk kneels in prayer at the doorway, his voice low but steady, the words mingling with the distant crowing of cocks. The merchant is, predictably, still snoring, sprawled across his bed of straw, like a man determined to remind everyone he survived another night. Joke number 1. If snoring were a miracle, he'd already be canonized. You rise slowly, stretching sore muscles that protest each movement. The smell of smoke lingers from last night's fire, mingling with the earthy scent of damp straw and the faint aroma of baking bread drifting from the village. Outside, the air is cool and sharp, heavy with dew. The mud of yesterday clings to your sandals in hardened clumps, each step crunching slightly as you shuffle toward the road again. Villagers offer simple kindness as you pass. A woman presses a small loaf of coarse rye bread into your hands, nodding silently. A child runs beside you briefly, giggling before darting back to his doorway. The monk blesses each with a sign of the cross, his voice soft but sincere. The widow smiles faintly, a small spark returning to her eyes. The merchant tries to barter with a farmer for cheese, though his pouch of cherries has dwindled to only a few sad pieces. The farmer declines with a laugh, and the merchant mutters under his breath. The road stretches onward, winding between fields edged with stone walls. Cows graze lazily, their bells clanging dully in the mist. The sound is oddly soothing, like a slow rhythm guiding your footsteps. Mainstream fact: pilgrim hospices were often set up near villages and monasteries, providing bread, soup, and sometimes a place to sleep. These shelters relied on local generosity and church support, forming a network that allowed pilgrims to survive journeys that would otherwise be impossible. Historians still argue whether hospitality was driven more by faith or profit, since pilgrims brought not just prayers, but also coins to local economies. Looking at the smiling villagers, you decide both explanations are probably true. After all, bread can be both gift and business. The widow begins humming again as the group walks, her tune weaving into the clatter of hooves and the calls of farmers. The monk joins her with a psalm, their voices rising gently above the morning air. Even the merchant, perhaps sensing the mood, refrains from boasting and simply listens, chewing one of his last cherries with exaggerated solemnity. The road grows rougher as you leave the village behind. Stones jut from the path, slick with moss, forcing your feet into careful steps. You stumble once, catching yourself with a hand against the wall, the sting reminding you that your blisters are far from healed. The widow steadies you with her free hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You nod in thanks, too tired for words. A crossroads appears, marked by a weathered signpost carved with faint letters. The monk studies it, tracing the grooves with his finger. He announces that Compostela lies still many days ahead, though his tone carries more encouragement than despair. You swallow hard. Many days feels both reassuring and crushing, proof of progress, yet reminder of how far remains. Fringe tidbit: some pilgrims carried badges or letters of safe conduct to prove their purpose, which granted them help along the way. You have no such badge, only blisters and determination, and you wonder briefly whether saints accept those as valid currency. The path narrows through a patch of forest, pines rising tall and damp, their branches dripping with yesterday's rain. The air smells sharp, resinous, a perfume that clings to your clothes. Birds flit overhead, unseen but constant, their calls bouncing through the canopy. Your sandals sink into layers of needles, soft and springy compared to stone. For a moment, the rhythm of walking feels almost pleasant, the pain dulled by the forest's hush. The merchant breaks the calm with another story. This one involves a tavern brawl in Flanders, a missing barrel of ale, and a goose that somehow escaped with more dignity than the men. His arms wave as he tells it, his voice rising with dramatic flair. The widow shakes her head, but smiles despite herself. The monk pretends not to listen, though the corners of his mouth twitch. Joke number 2. You realize that for all his boasting, the merchant's true gift is serving as a traveling comedy act, and that doesn't even charge admission. The forest path eventually opens onto another small hospice, little more than a timber hut, with smoke curling from its chimney. A weary friar greets you, offering bowls of thin soup made from barley and leeks. The broth is watery but warm, and you sip it gratefully, the heat spreading through your chilled body. The widow presses her relic against the bowl briefly, as though even soup deserves sanctifying. The merchant asks for seconds, of course, though the friar declines with a polite but firm smile. Mainstream fact: leeks and onions were common staples in medieval diets, cheap to grow and easy to preserve. They often appeared in pilgrim meals, filling the belly, if not delighting the tongue. You decide the soup is delicious anyway, mostly because hunger makes everything taste like a feast. As evening approaches, you continue onward. The road climbs again, winding into hills where mist clings stubbornly. The path narrows, forcing single file, each pilgrim trudging silently with thoughts heavy as their steps. The widow hums once more, her tune soft but insistent, carrying the group forward. The monk's prayers thread beneath her song, a steady drone of comfort. The merchant, unusually quiet, munches on his last cherry as though marking the end of a chapter. Historians still argue whether pilgrim journeys bonded strangers into communities or simply tolerated them until arrival. Walking beside this odd mix, monk, widow, merchant, you sense both truths. Bonds form in hardship, but tolerance carries you through the hours between. As night falls, you find lodging at another simple shelter, this one more crowded. Pilgrims you have not met lie on straw mats, their faces drawn with the same exhaustion you feel. Some share stories of miracles along the road, a blind man healed by touching a relic, a woman saved from wolves by sudden firelight. You listen, unsure whether to believe, but comforted nonetheless. Joke number 3. You note that if every miracle tale were true, the Camino would be less pilgrimage and more theme park of wonders. Still, you find yourself hoping for at least one small miracle, preferably involving softer shoes. You settle into your straw bed, the fire crackling low, the widow curled beside her relic, the monk already asleep, the merchant snoring with heroic volume. Outside, the night hums with crickets and owls, the road waiting silently for tomorrow's footsteps. The night passes in fits and starts, with snores and murmurs blending into the crackle of the dying fire. You wake before dawn, the straw beneath you prickling your skin, your body aching as if the road itself had pressed into your bones during sleep. The widow is already awake, her lips moving silently over her relic cloth. The monk sits cross-legged, eyes closed, hands folded on his knees, steady as carved stone. The merchant sprawls across his mat, arm thrown dramatically over his face, as if even unconscious, he must remind the world of his suffering. Joke number 1. If theatrical sleeping were an Olympic sport, he'd win gold without leaving bed. You rise, stretch stiff muscles, and step outside. The air is damp, cool, filled with the scent of wood smoke and dew. Mist curls over the fields, softening edges, blurring boundaries between earth and sky. The road lies ahead, a pale ribbon vanishing into haze. You breathe deeply, the taste of morning sharp on your tongue, and ready yourself to walk again. The group gathers slowly, shuffling into motion with the rhythm of tired feet. The widow hums almost immediately, her tune fragile but determined, a thread of continuity that holds the days together. The monk joins with a psalm, his voice steady, his tone carrying farther than you expect. The merchant lingers behind, muttering about sore legs, but even he falls into step soon enough. The path leads through villages where children peek from doorways, eyes wide at the sight of mud-caked travelers. A woman offers a basket of apples, small and tart, their skins mottled but fresh. You take one, biting into crisp flesh that bursts with sharp sweetness. Mainstream fact: apples were common along pilgrimage routes, often dried or pressed into cider for storage, though fresh fruit was a welcome luxury. You savor it as though it were the finest delicacy in Christendom. The merchant pockets 2 apples when he thinks no one is looking, though everyone notices. The monk shakes his head, the widow sighs, and you bite back laughter. Historians still argue whether pilgrims were paragons of virtue or opportunists exploiting every chance for gain. Judging by the merchant's stuffed pouch, the truth is obvious. Pilgrims were simply people, saints on their best days, scoundrels on their worst. The road narrows into a wooded valley, where the air grows cooler, scented with ferns and damp stone. The path winds beside a stream, its water chattering against rocks, its surface flashing silver in dappled light. You pause to kneel, cupping hands to drink. The cold water shocks your teeth, sharp and clean, washing salt and dust from your throat. The widow follows, dipping her relic briefly into the stream before drinking. The monk blesses the water aloud, though even he drinks deeply, letting piety give way to thirst. Fringe tidbit. Some pilgrims collected water from holy streams along the route, believing it carried healing power. Small flasks, often shaped like scallop shells, were sold in villages to carry the water home. You imagine the merchant filling such a flask and trying to sell it back at double the price. The thought makes you chuckle quietly as you rise. The path grows steeper, climbing into hills that test already weary legs. Your thighs burn, your lungs labor, your sandals slip on loose stones. The monk presses forward with tireless resolve, his prayers steady as his stride. The widow slows, her breath ragged, but she continues without complaint. The merchant groans loudly, every step a performance. Joke number 2. If Compostela gave blessings per complaint, the merchant would be absolved for 7 generations. At the crest of the hill, the forest opens onto a clearing where locals have built a wayside cross. Its wood is weathered, carved with faint names and symbols, wax from countless candles pooling at its base. Pilgrims before you have left tokens, shells, coins, scraps of cloth. The widow kneels immediately, pressing her relic to the wood. The monk bows his head, murmuring a blessing. The merchant drops one of his stolen apples at the base, muttering something about offerings. You hesitate, then place a small stone from the roadside, a token of weight carried and released. Mainstream fact: roadside crosses and shrines became common along the Camino, markers of faith and rest stops for weary pilgrims. They offered both spiritual comfort and practical reminders that others had walked the same road. Historians still argue whether locals built them out of devotion or as markers for trade, but their presence endured regardless. Leaving the shrine, the road dips again, winding through fields dotted with sheep. Their bells jangle as they graze, shepherds watching from low stone walls. One waves at you, offering a smile and a hunk of cheese. The merchant nearly runs to accept it, though the widow gently insists he share. You each taste a crumb, sharp, tangy, crumbling on the tongue. It lingers like sunshine condensed into curds. The day lengthens. The road stretches onward, a cycle of mud, stone, and fleeting kindness. Villages blur together, cottages of whitewashed walls, barns that smell of hay and manure, chapels with bells that toll softly as you pass. You lose sense of distance, measuring progress not in miles, but in aches. Each blister, each strained muscle, each breath becomes its own marker along the path. Evening draws near, the light softening to gold. You arrive at a hospice larger than the last, a timber hall crowded with pilgrims. Beds of straw line the walls, and a long fire crackles at the center. The smell of stew fills the air, lentils, garlic, perhaps a hint of pork. You eat greedily, each spoonful grounding you in warmth. The widow eats slowly, reverently, her eyes closed as though each bite is a prayer. The monk thanks the friar serving the stew, his words sincere. The merchant, unsurprisingly, asks for seconds and somehow gets them. As night falls, pilgrims gather around the fire to share stories. One speaks of visions seen on the road, a shining figure who appeared at a crossroad and vanished at dawn. Another tells of wolves that prowled, but never attacked, deterred by unseen guardians. The widow listens with rapt attention. The monk nods solemnly, and the merchant mutters about exaggeration. Joke number 3. You whisper that if wolves really avoid pilgrims, it's probably because they dislike the smell of mud-soaked sandals. Laughter bubbles, easing the weight of the day. You lie down at last on your straw bed, the fire crackling low, the murmur of voices fading into night. The widow curls near her relic. The monk whispers one final psalm, and the merchant snores with renewed gusto. You close your eyes, the ache of the road still heavy in your body, but sleep comes anyway, carrying you forward as surely as footsteps will tomorrow. The morning air is cool, damp with fog that clings to the ground like a second skin. You rise stiffly from the straw bed, brushing hay from your tunic, every muscle protesting as if you had aged decades overnight. Around you, the hospice stirs with the familiar sounds of travelers. Coughs, muttered prayers, the groan of joints as weary bodies prepare to move again. The widow folds her relic cloth carefully, tucking it close to her chest. The monk stretches his arms skyward, whispering a psalm of gratitude for another day. The merchant, of course, insists he nearly died in the night from poor ventilation. Joke number 1. If Compostela rewarded dramatics, he would receive a crown instead of a scallop shell. You step outside into a world muffled by mist. The road is damp, stones slick, puddles shining faintly in the dim light. Pines loom on either side, their branches dripping water onto your shoulders. The air smells sharp, resinous, a blend of earth and smoke from distant chimneys. Your sandals squelch as you join the procession of pilgrims heading deeper into Galicia, their cloaks flapping, staffs tapping rhythm on stone. The monk takes the lead today, his stride steady, his voice lifting in psalms that rise above the damp silence. The widow follows close, her humming threading into his chant, until the two sounds mingle like woven cloth. The merchant trudges behind, muttering about wet boots, though his eyes dart to every side path, as if calculating shortcuts. You walk in the middle, letting the rhythm of footsteps steady your thoughts. Mainstream fact: forests like these covered much of medieval Galicia, dense and shadowed, home to wolves and boar. Pilgrims often feared attacks, both from animals and from bandits who knew how to vanish into the trees. Historians still argue whether these dangers were exaggerated in chronicles, or whether terror simply amplified memory. Either way, the shadows hold enough mystery to make your skin prickle. The path climbs, steep and uneven, roots twisting through the stones like ropes laid to trip you. Your legs burn, your breath fogs, your palms sting from gripping trees for balance. The widow stumbles once, and you catch her arm, steadying her. She nods gratefully, though her lips still move in prayer. The merchant complains loudly about the incline, declaring that no amount of blessings could justify this climb. The monk ignores him, eyes fixed upward, as if already glimpsing Compostela beyond the clouds. At a bend in the path, you come upon a clearing where smoke curls from a small fire. A local shepherd sits on a rock, his sheep grazing nearby. He offers bread and goat cheese to weary pilgrims, his face weathered, his eyes kind. You accept a slice, the cheese sharp, the bread coarse but filling. The widow presses her relic to the loaf before eating. The monk blesses the shepherd, and the merchant tries to negotiate for more cheese with one of his last coins. Fringe tidbit: some records mention shepherds and villagers charging small fees for food or guiding services. transforming pilgrimage routes into bustling economies. Whether out of kindness or profit, you realize survival often depended on these exchanges. You chew slowly, grateful for both bread and the reminder that generosity, however mixed with commerce, keeps bodies moving. The road narrows again, plunging into thicker forest. Mist curls low, muffling sound, making each footstep echo strangely. The widow hums louder now, her tune quivering but steady. The monk's psalm shifts to a deeper tone, a chant that reverberates against the trunks. The merchant clears his throat and mutters something about ghosts, his bravado thinner than usual. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims truly believed in spirits haunting these woods, or whether fear simply birthed stories to explain the unease of shadow and silence. You lean toward belief, if only because the mist feels thick enough to hide anything. A sudden snap of branches makes everyone freeze. Your heart hammers, your hand gripping your staff. For a moment, the forest feels alive with unseen eyes. Then, a boar bursts from the underbrush, tusks flashing, body glistening with rain. Pilgrims shout, scrambling aside. The merchant yelps, climbing a rock with surprising agility. The widow clutches her relic, whispering prayers faster than breath. The monk steps forward, calm as stone, raising his staff. The boar snorts, stares, then bolts past, vanishing into mist. Silence follows, broken only by ragged breathing. Joke number 2. You mutter that Santiago clearly sent the boar to test the merchant's climbing skills. Laughter bubbles nervously, easing the tension, even from the widow, whose hands still tremble. The road climbs higher, twisting between trees until the forest thins. The mist lifts gradually, revealing glimpses of sky. Your lungs burn, your calves scream, but the sight ahead steadies you. The path cresting into a ridge, promising a view beyond. You push harder, shoulders hunched, sandals slipping on damp stone. The monk encourages with a verse. The widow hums stubbornly. The merchant groans like a man on his last breath. At the top, the world opens wide. Valleys spread below, rivers, glinting silver through folds of green. Villages cluster along slopes, their smoke rising in thin trails. Beyond, faint but undeniable, lies the direction of Compostela. The widow gasps, tears glinting in her eyes. The monk bows deeply, whispering thanks. The merchant sits heavily on a rock, clutching his chest as though the view itself nearly killed him. You breathe deeply, the wind cool on your sweat-soaked face. For a moment, the aches fade, replaced by awe. Mainstream fact: pilgrims often marked such high points with prayers of thanksgiving, believing these glimpses of the land ahead were gifts of encouragement. Historians still argue whether these rituals were spontaneous or formal, but either way, the ridge feels like a chapel without walls. Descending, your knees protest with every step. The path winds sharply, stones slick with moss. The widow slips once more, and again you steady her, the weight of her gratitude pressing heavier than her hand. The merchant mutters about ruined boots, though his voice is softer now, perhaps still tamed by the ridge's grandeur. Evening draws near, the sky bruising purple. You reach another hospice, smaller this time, crowded with travelers. The smell of smoke and stew fills the single hall. You collapse onto straw, body aching, but grateful. Pilgrims share stories by the fire, tales of relics glowing in the night, of miraculous healings at roadside shrines. The widow listens raptly. The monk nods solemnly, and the merchant scoffs, but eats 2 bowls of stew anyway. Joke number 3. You whisper that if miracles include bottomless stew, you're ready to declare this hospice holy ground. Laughter ripples around the fire, warming even weary hearts. As you lie back, staring at the smoke curling toward the rafters, your body hums with exhaustion. Yet beneath the ache, a steady rhythm persists. The footsteps of the road, the humming of the widow, the psalms of the monk, the grumbling of the merchant. Together, they carry you closer, each day a step, each step a prayer, each prayer a beat in the long march toward Compostela. The morning begins with damp air pressing against your skin, the mist rolling through the forest like a patient tide. You rise from the straw bed with every joint stiff, as though you had spent the night not on straw, but on a floor of stone. The widow is awake already, carefully wrapping her relic cloth, her eyes still soft from prayers whispered before dawn. The monk tends to the fire's embers, coaxing them back to life with steady breaths. The merchant groans as he stretches, announcing that his back has suffered more than any saint in history. Joke number 1. If Compostela gave medals for exaggerated agony, he would be paraded into the cathedral like a hero. The road waits outside, still slick with dew. Your sandals grip poorly on the stones, each step tentative. The air smells of pine and earth, heavy with the promise of rain. You fall into line with the others, your steps echoing with dozens more pilgrims heading the same way. The rhythm of walking becomes its own chant, staffs tapping, sandals dragging, breath fogging in unison. The monk lifts his voice again, psalms weaving upward into the mist. The widow hums her melody beneath it, the 2 sounds braiding together until the road itself seems to vibrate with song. The merchant listens in silence for once, perhaps too tired, or perhaps just unwilling to compete with sacred music. You too let the sound carry you, steadying your stride with its rhythm. Mainstream fact: medieval pilgrimage routes were lined with small markers, stones, crosses, or carved shells, that guided travelers westward. They served as both direction and devotion, reminders that thousands of feet had worn the same path before yours. You spot one now, a weathered shell carved into a stone wall. The widow touches it with reverence, the monk bows briefly, and the merchant pats it as though for luck before trudging on. The road climbs again, winding through steep hills. Your legs burn, each step a negotiation between pain and persistence. The widow stumbles, and once more you steady her, her gratitude silent but palpable. The monk presses forward without slowing, his determination carrying him upward like a force stronger than fatigue. The merchant mutters complaints, but even he continues, each groan punctuated by another step. At midday, the path opens onto a small hamlet clustered around a chapel. The bell tolls faintly, echoing over the fields. Villagers greet pilgrims with cautious kindness, offering bowls of thin broth and rough bread. You eat slowly, savoring warmth more than flavor. The widow dips her relic cloth into her bowl before tasting, as though sanctifying even the simplest meal. The monk blesses the villagers, his words sincere. The merchant tries to barter again, offering a button for an extra slice of bread, but receives only laughter. Historians still argue whether such villages thrived because of pilgrim traffic, or whether pilgrims merely passed through places already prosperous. Looking at the busy square, children running, animals tethered, traders shouting, you decide both are true. Pilgrimage and livelihood walk hand in hand, neither possible without the other. After resting briefly, you set out again. The road winds upward once more, narrower now, flanked by thick forest. The air cools, shadows stretching long across the path. Birds scatter noisily as you pass, their wings flashing white against the green canopy. The widow hums louder, her melody rising in defiance of the gloom. The monk chants steadily, each note like a step carved into stone. The merchant mutters that the forest smells too much like damp socks, drawing laughter despite the shadows. Joke number 2. Even in darkness, he insists on playing the role of unwilling entertainer. The climb grows steeper, your breath shortening, your thighs screaming. Roots twist underfoot, slick with moss, threatening to trip you. The widow clutches your arm once more, her steps faltering, but she refuses to stop. The monk presses on, sweat shining on his brow, but his pace unbroken. The merchant lags behind, panting, but fear of being left alone keeps him moving. At last, the forest thins, and you emerge onto a ridge. The view steals your breath as much as the climb. Hills roll endlessly, cloaked in green and mist, valleys stitched with silver rivers. In the far distance, faint against the horizon, you glimpse spires rising above the haze. Santiago still lies days ahead, but the sight of stone-piercing sky feels like a promise kept. The widow gasps, tears glinting in her eyes. The monk bows deeply, his psalm turning into thanksgiving. The merchant collapses onto a rock, declaring that no view is worth this climb. Mainstream fact. Pilgrims often described their first glimpse of Compostela as transformative, a vision that renewed strength for the final miles. Historians still argue whether such accounts were literal or literary embellishments, but you know firsthand the surge of hope such a sight brings. Descending proves harder than climbing. Your knees ache, your sandals slip, and each step requires focus. The widow grips your arm, steadying herself. The monk helps another pilgrim down, his strength seemingly inexhaustible. The merchant slides once, landing on his backside in the mud, to the group's collective amusement. Joke number 3. You remark that perhaps Compostela offers indulgences for grass stains too. Even the widow laughs softly at that. Evening approaches with the road narrowing between stone walls. A hospice welcomes you at the edge of a village, its door open, its fire glowing within. You collapse onto straw, your body drained, but your heart steadied by the vision of spires lingering in your mind. Around the fire, pilgrims share stories again. Miracles witnessed, relics touched, storms endured. The widow listens intently, her eyes wide with wonder. The monk nods gravely, adding his own blessing. The merchant scoffs, though he eats stew with unholy enthusiasm. You lie back on the straw, staring at the rafters blackened by smoke. The fire crackles, the widow hums, the monk whispers, the merchant snores. The road has carried you higher, shown you the promise of Santiago, and now cradles you in simple rest. Tomorrow will come with new aches, new mud, new miles. But for tonight, you sleep with hope closer than ever before. The morning greets you with bells. They toll faintly in the distance, carried through the mist by a breeze that smells of wet grass and wood smoke. You blink awake on your bed of straw, joints stiff, mouth dry, body reluctant to move. Around you, pilgrims stir like embers rekindled after a long night. The widow smooths her relic cloth with tender care, as if preparing it to meet holy air. The monk kneels already, whispering his psalms with a steadiness that has not faltered since the first day. The merchant groans so loudly, it sounds like a warning siren for anyone within a mile. Joke number 1. If Compostela paid out indulgences per complaint, he'd be debt-free for eternity. You step outside and breathe the morning. The mist still clings low, but the horizon is clearer now. The road runs ahead between fields, and in the far distance, spires thrust upward into sky. They are not close, but they are undeniable. The widow gasps softly, pressing her relic to her lips. The monk bows his head with tears glinting faintly. Even the merchant falls silent, his mouth open in something between awe and disbelief. You feel it too, a surge through tired bones, a reminder that every blister, every stroke of the oar, every step in mud has led to this vision. The road into Santiago is crowded. Pilgrims gather from every path, streams of travelers merging like rivers into one current. You walk among them, each face lined with the same exhaustion, the same hope. Voices rise in many tongues: French, German, Italian, Latin, woven together in a chorus of determination. Mainstream fact: Compostela in the Middle Ages drew thousands from across Europe, its cathedral one of the great centers of Christendom, second only to Rome and Jerusalem. Historians still argue whether its popularity owed more to piety or politics. But here, in the press of weary bodies, you see only devotion. Vendors line the roadside as you near the city, hawking shells, staffs, and trinkets. The scallop shell gleams everywhere, carved into wood, painted onto cloth, tied to cloaks. The widow touches one stall reverently, buying a small shell despite her meager coins. The monk accepts one, given freely by a smiling boy. The merchant buys 3, loudly declaring he'll sell 2 when he gets home. You shake your head, amused despite yourself. The air thickens with incense as you approach the gates. Smoke curls above rooftops, mingling with the cries of merchants and the murmur of prayers. The city walls rise before you, massive and weathered, a barrier that seems more symbolic than protective. Passing through, you are struck by the sheer press of humanity. Narrow streets are packed with pilgrims, their cloaks muddy, their sandals worn, their eyes alight. The sound of bells grows louder as you press forward. Streets twist between tall stone houses, their windows crowded with curious faces. The smell of baking bread drifts through the air, mingling with sweat, smoke, and the faint tang of wine. You catch sight of inns with signs painted in crude symbols, promising beds, food, or perhaps just shelter from rain. Historians still argue whether Compostela's booming pilgrim economy was driven by genuine faith or shrewd opportunism. You decide it doesn't matter. Hunger makes you grateful for both. At last, the streets open into the square. You stop in your tracks. Before you towers the cathedral, vast and commanding, its stones soaring into sky, its facade carved with saints, angels, and beasts. Spires pierce the clouds, bells ringing so loudly they seem to shake the very air. Pilgrims fall to their knees, some weeping, some laughing, some silent in awe. The widow clutches her relic, tears streaming freely. The monk kneels deeply, forehead to stone, his psalm swallowed by the bells. Even the merchant removes his hat, silence wrapping around him like a cloak. You step forward slowly, heart pounding. The square is alive with humanity. Pilgrims pressing inward, vendors shouting, friars guiding, beggars pleading. Yet the cathedral commands all eyes, every gaze drawn upward to its grandeur. Mainstream fact. The Cathedral of Santiago was consecrated in 1211, built on layers of earlier churches, each stone laid to magnify the cult of St. James. Its scale dwarfed most buildings of its age, a declaration of faith in stone. The widow whispers, "We are here." Her voice is trembling, but filled with awe. The monk nods silently, eyes wet. The merchant mutters something about his boots, but even he cannot mask the reverence in his gaze. Fringe tidbit. Some accounts claimed pilgrims saw visions of light or heard angelic music as they entered the square, though skeptics suggested exhaustion and hunger created such illusions. You glance upward at the spires shimmering faintly in mist, and think perhaps exhaustion and holiness are not so different. The press of pilgrims carries you to the great doors. You pass under arches carved with apostles and saints, their faces weathered, but still stern. The stone is cool under your hand, smoothed by centuries of touches. Inside, the cathedral swallows you whole. The air is heavy with incense, thick and sweet, clinging to your lungs. Light filters through narrow windows, illuminating motes of dust that drift like holy sparks. The widow sinks to her knees, pressing her relic to the floor. The monk bows deeply, whispering prayers with trembling lips. The merchant stares upward, his jaw slack, perhaps forgetting for once to complain. You too are overcome, and the vast arches rise above, their stone ribs meeting like fingers of heaven, and you feel both tiny and infinite. The crowd presses toward the shrine of St. James, where pilgrims line up to touch the statue worn smooth by countless hands. You join the line, shuffling forward slowly. The widow clutches her relic, her breath quick. The monk clasps his hands tightly, his lips moving without pause. The merchant pats his pouch as though trying to decide whether blessings can be tallied like coins. When your turn comes, you step forward. The statue rises before you, its surface polished by centuries of devotion. You reach out, fingers trembling, and touch the stone. It is cool, solid, yet thrumming with the weight of countless lives, countless prayers pressed into it. For a moment, you feel everything. The storms, the mud, the hunger, the laughter, the tears, all condensed into that touch. Historians still argue whether relics and statues truly held power, or whether the power came from the pilgrims who believed. But in that moment, belief itself is power enough. The widow presses her relic to the statue, tears streaming freely. The monk bows his head so deeply his forehead rests against the stone. The merchant touches it quickly, mutters something under his breath, then steps aside, blinking rapidly as though caught in unfamiliar emotion. The bells toll again, vibrating through stone and bone alike. The air swells with song, voices rising in hymns that echo off the arches. You close your eyes, the sound washing over you, carrying you higher than fatigue, higher than pain, higher even than thought. Joke number 2. You catch yourself thinking that after so much rowing and walking, you deserve not just blessings, but also a decent foot massage from a saint. The widow clasps your hand briefly, her touch light but full of meaning. The monk looks at you, eyes shining with quiet triumph. The merchant sighs, muttering that perhaps the journey was worth it after all. You step back into the nave, light streaming faintly through the high windows. The cathedral hums with life, with voices, with faith. You are here. At last, you are here. Joke number 3. You whisper to yourself that Compostela should really hand out medals for surviving blisters, storms, and the merchant's endless stories. The cathedral hums like a living thing, the air thick with incense and murmured prayers. You stand among pilgrims who have come from every corner of Europe, their faces marked by exhaustion and triumph. The widow kneels near the altar, her relic cloth pressed tight against her heart, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. The monk bows so deeply his forehead nearly touches the stone floor, his psalm trembling with gratitude. Even the merchant, who spent days groaning about mud and storms, falls silent, his eyes wide as he stares at the gilded altar. Joke number 1. If Compostela issued awards for stunned silence, the merchant would finally win something. You step forward with the others, joining the throng that presses toward the shrine of St. James. Candles burn in great clusters, dripping wax like rivers frozen in motion. The scent is heavy, sweet, cloying, mixing with the salt of sweat and the musty odor of cloaks damp from travel. The stone beneath your feet is worn smooth by centuries of knees and hands, each pilgrim leaving a mark too subtle for sight, but deep enough for spirit. Mainstream fact: by the 13th century, the cathedral housed the relics of St. James in a silver reliquary, drawing pilgrims in numbers that astonished even chroniclers of the time. Some claimed more than 500,000 souls passed through in a single year, though historians still argue whether such figures were exaggerations or approximations. You look at the crowd and believe both. Numbers might swell in legend, but devotion is no less overwhelming in truth. You kneel, pressing your forehead to the cool stone step. The air is thick with whispered petitions, prayers for healing, forgiveness, guidance, or simple survival. The widow's voice trembles beside you, her words unintelligible, but filled with desperate sincerity. The monk's tone steadies, measured, as though speaking not just for himself, but for everyone around him. The merchant mutters something that might be a bargain, his hand still tucked against his pouch. You close your eyes and let the murmur surround you, a river of faith carrying you forward. Later, you rise with aching knees and join the line to embrace the statue of the apostle. The figure towers above, carved in stone, polished smooth by millions of hands. Pilgrims press forward, arms wrapping around the saint's shoulders, whispering words only they and heaven can hear. When your turn comes, you step forward, your heart pounding. You place your arms around the cold stone, your cheek brushing its curve, and for a moment, all the hardship condenses into this embrace. Storms endured, mud crossed, blisters carried, songs sung. Fringe tidbit: some pilgrims believed the embrace carried away sins physically, as though scraped off by the stone. Others claimed it granted strength to walk the road home. Historians still argue whether this ritual began organically among pilgrims or was encouraged by clergy to deepen devotion. You decide the origin doesn't matter. The power is in the act, not the history. The widow follows, her tears soaking into the statue as she clutches it. The monk bows deeply, whispering words of thanksgiving. The merchant pats the saint quickly, glancing around as if embarrassed, though the tightness in his jaw suggests more feeling than he'll admit. From there, you are led toward the crypt, where the reliquary rests. The silver gleams faintly in the candlelight, guarded by silence heavier than incense. Pilgrims press forward, some kneeling, some bowing, some simply standing frozen. You touch the rail, your fingers trembling, and feel the weight of centuries press close. Here lies the reason for the journey, whether in truth or in symbol, and the presence hums with significance. The widow collapses to her knees, her entire body shaking with sobs. The monk kneels too, head bowed, lips moving without pause. The merchant stands stiffly, his shoulders squared. Tu! His face unreadable. Joke number 2. You imagine him calculating how much silver might be worth if relics came with a receipt. The service begins, filling the cathedral with music. The great organ thunders, its pipes releasing sound so vast it shakes your ribs. Choir voices rise, weaving with the crowd's response, each note echoing off arches until the stone itself seems to sing. The widow clutches her relic, her lips parting in song. The monk's voice joins, strong and steady. Even the merchant mumbles along, though off-key, his voice blending with the multitude. You add your own, timid at first, then stronger, until your voice, too, threads into the tapestry of sound. Mainstream fact. The botafumero, a massive censer, was sometimes swung across the cathedral during high feast days, filling the nave with incense. Pilgrims described it as a spectacle of both devotion and awe. Today, you see the ropes lowered, the censer attached, and soon it swings, huge, heavy, arching through the air like a pendulum of heaven. Smoke pours out, filling the cathedral with clouds of sweet, choking fragrance. The widow gasps, her eyes wide in wonder. The monk bows deeper, arms folded across his chest. The merchant coughs loudly, muttering about suffocation, and you stifle a laugh. Joke number 3. If incense alone could absolve sins, you'd leave Compostela as spotless as a newborn. When the service ends, pilgrims spill into the square outside. Bells toll overhead, shaking the air with thunderous joy. The crowd mills, some laughing, some weeping, some kneeling in the mud as though unwilling to let the moment pass. The widow clutches your arm, her eyes shining, her voice soft. We are blessed. The monk nods gravely, his face glowing with quiet triumph. The merchant sighs, rubbing his back, muttering that the journey was almost worth the trouble. You stand in the square, gazing up at the cathedral's spires. Clouds drift past, sunlight catching briefly on stone, turning it gold. For the first time since you left home, you feel something like stillness, an arrival, a fulfillment, a moment caught between exhaustion and peace. Historians still argue whether pilgrimage transformed lives permanently or merely offered temporary relief. You cannot answer for centuries, but you know this moment has changed you, however briefly. The road remains, the return awaits, but here, in the shadow of stone, you are remade by the weight of journey and arrival alike. You exhale, long and slow, as though emptying not just lungs, but burdens. The bells ring again, their sound rolling out across hills and forests, carrying word of your arrival to the very edges of the land. The days after Compostela feel strangely quiet. The great square, once filled with the thunder of bells and the murmur of thousands of voices, now lies behind you. You wake early, pack what little you carry, and step once more onto the road, though now the path leads away, back toward home. Your sandals, cracked from mud and sea, slap against the stones with weary rhythm. The widow walks beside you, her relic pressed to her chest as always. Though her steps are lighter now, her sorrow eased by tears shed at the shrine. The monk keeps his steady pace, his lips still moving with psalms, but his tone carries a softer joy, no longer just endurance. The merchant, to no one's surprise, groans about the prospect of walking all the way back, though even he seems less sour, as if awe still lingers on his tongue. Joke number 1. If pilgrims were given round-trip tickets, half of the merchant's complaints would vanish instantly. The road unfolds through the Galician hills, damp pine needles soft underfoot, birds darting between branches. The air feels fresher now, as though the land itself knows you carry blessings away with you. Villagers nod as you pass, their faces warm, their baskets of bread or fruit offered with easy generosity. You accept an apple, crisp and sharp, the juice cutting through the taste of salt and smoke. The widow presses her relic briefly against the fruit before eating, smiling faintly. The monk thanks each villager with gentle words. The merchant tries to barter with promises of stories, but children only laugh at his grand gestures. Mainstream fact: pilgrims returning from Santiago often wore the scallop shell on their cloaks, proof of completion. It was both badge and passport, opening doors along the way, granting hospitality from strangers who recognized its meaning. Historians still argue whether the shell was always freely given or sometimes sold for profit. But in either case, it marked a traveler as changed. You touch the shell tied to your cloak and feel its weight like a quiet metal. The path descends into valleys where rivers glint silver, their water rushing cold and fast. You kneel to drink, cupping the stream in your blistered hands. The widow hums softly beside you, her melody calmer now, less desperate, more like a lullaby. The monk blesses the water, his words falling like ripples across the surface. The merchant splashes his face dramatically, declaring the river colder than any storm, earning laughter from those nearby. Joke number 2. If exaggeration burned calories, the merchant would return home lean as a monk. Nights on the return journey are gentler. Hospices feel warmer, fires brighter, bread more filling. Pilgrims gather not only to rest, but to retell the moment of arrival. Each story painted larger than life. Each voice claiming the bells rang louder. The incense burned sweeter. The statue gleamed brighter. The widow listens with soft eyes, her own memory enough. The monk adds only a line or two, modest as always. The merchant embellishes wildly, insisting he nearly fainted from sheer holiness, though he never actually did. Joke number 3. If fainting became a relic-worthy act, the merchant would already be enshrined. You lie awake one night, staring at rafters blackened by smoke, and think of how far you have come. The storms, the mud, the hunger, the laughter, the tears, they linger in your body like lines carved into wood. You wonder whether home will feel the same, or whether Compostela has shifted something too deeply to reverse. Historians still argue whether pilgrims returned unchanged after time, or whether the journey left a permanent mark. You think the answer is both. The road fades, yet remains etched beneath the skin, a memory carried in every step after. Morning comes again, the road waiting, stretching endless as before. Yet each step feels different now, lighter, steadier. The widow hums, the monk prays, the merchant grumbles, and you walk on, carrying more than relics, carrying the weight and wonder of a journey that remade you. Now your body slows, and the pace softens, every image fading like embers cooling in the hearth. You feel the ache in your shoulders ease, the heaviness in your legs settle into calm weight. The road that seemed endless narrows into memory, the sounds of bells and chanting drifting away into distance. You breathe more slowly now, filling your lungs with air that feels smoother, quieter, almost like silk brushing against your chest. Each exhale carries tension with it, leaving you lighter, steadier, ready for stillness. The widow's humming quiets into silence. The monk's psalm dissolves into a whisper, and even the merchant's grumbling fades, until there is only the hush of wind through trees. You are no longer pressed by the sea's spray or the mud's clutch, no longer hurried by storms or pulled by aching muscles. Instead, you rest, steady, as if the earth itself has given you permission to stop. Images soften further. The scallop shell glimmers faintly, then disappears into shadow. The cathedral spires melt into mist, their stone gentled into clouds. Even the reliquary, gleaming silver, recedes into a quiet glow. You do not need to hold them any longer. They remain within you, already carried home. Let yourself drift now, each breath longer, slower, deeper. The journey has ended, the road folded behind you, yet its rhythm stays, like a lullaby sung far away. The sea, the hills, the square, the songs, all of them blur into stillness. All of them dissolve into rest. You are safe now. You are finished. The world grows quiet, soft, forgiving. Close your eyes, release the last of the road, and let sleep take you gently, like a tide carrying you home.